Welcome to Quid Pros Quo, where creativity meets academia. Here, we're all about leveraging our love of academia to improve both your creative writing practice and ours. Whether you're honing your craft or just beginning your writing journey, we're here to share scholarly insights, inspiration, and advice that benefits us all. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to Quid Pros Quo. I'm Zach.
And I'm Rin.
And today we are doing our traditionally published case study for our planetary science course. If this is the first time that you're joining us, welcome. We are currently finishing up our planetary science course for world building. Today we are going to be talking about the three-body problem by Cixin Liu. Because of that, we're going to say now that we're going to discuss some spoilers, so if you want to avoid spoilers, this is a good episode to skip. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, that sounds like a plan to me. I, unfortunately, have not read the book, but I had to be here, so I don't get to skip the spoilers. Oops. I knew we were doing this for like months, and I just didn't read the book in time. I'm trying to read. For our next case study, it'll be an indie published book, and we're trying really hard to get through the indie books that were submitted to us. So fingers crossed, you know?
We'll find a way. We'll definitely find a way.
So the summary of The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu is it's a hard sci-fi novel about humanity's first contact with a species of aliens bent on destroying Earth. It's named after a famous problem in physics. It's generally not possible to create a symbolic solution, and if you're not familiar with symbolic solutions, they're ones you can write out rather than store on a computer. And they're it's where you use like X's and Y's and A's and these symbols instead of actually plugging the numbers in. And it creates a symbolic solution to the orbits of three similar-sized masses close to each other.
So, in the book, Liu rebrands Alpha Centauri, which is the star system that is closest to us in real life, as Tri-Solaris, and makes it a three-body problem by bringing the third member of Alpha Centauri much closer to the other two stars in the system. If you'll remember, earlier in the series, we talked about how you can have hierarchical systems, and Alpha Centauri is an example of that. There's a binary, and then there is one more star that's much further away that orbits around that binary. Inside of the three-body problem, that third star is brought in close in order to create this chaotic environment.
So then the aliens in Liu's book evolved in an environment that was completely unpredictable because of this three-body problem. At various times, the world was too hot to be habitable and too cold. There's one instance where the tidal forces on the planet as it passes between the stars tears the planet in half.
Intense. It's pretty intense, guys.
Yeah, for real. That's like, from a biology perspective, that makes it like almost impossible for life to evolve.
Exactly. And I think it's worth pointing out that in this book, Liu is completely eschewing the discussion about habitability as far as like how probable it is for things to evolve in certain contexts and to survive in certain contexts, and instead focuses on what would life have to look like in order to survive inside of this environment, which is a perfectly legitimate question. It's a perfectly legitimate way to approach science fiction. It drives a lot of compelling fiction because it goes beyond what we currently know and the current type of knowledge that we have. And that going beyond is part of what makes science fiction science fiction. And in some ways, we could define science fiction as a liberal genre to contrast it with fantasy's conservatism, since so many fantasy books are about returning to the place where you were, returning to a historical time period. It's a going back rather than a moving forward.
For sure. And we have a course coming up. It's not the next course, but it's the course after that where we'll talk about the politics of speculative fiction. So we're really excited for that one, so you should stick around for that too.
Yeah.
So in order to survive the crazy environment, the alien in the three-body problem, the aliens have evolved a method for dehydrating themselves so they can survive in stasis for long periods of time, which is where Leo works through the biological implications of his stellar system, which immediately makes me think of tardigrades, if you're familiar with those.
Yeah.
You probably are. You're an astrophysicist and you use them in space experiments. That
I
makes
love
sense for you.
tardigrades. They look so cute on
They're
the
so
in the
cute. They're so
microscope.
fun. So he goes to like the biological implications of this stellar system, but he also includes cultural details about how seeing the three stars in the sky is a bad omen.
Yeah. In other like cultural cues that Liu builds out for his aliens, um, he has the way that time is measured be a little bit different than it is on Earth. Um, on Earth, because we have regular orbits, we can break things down into years and months and days. That's not possible on Trisolaris, and so time is divided into stable and unstable eras, corresponding to times when the planet is relatively peaceful versus when it is mostly uninhabited.
So as a result, Trisolaran society is highly hierarchical. That's a hard two words to put together. Highly hierarchical.
Oh, yeah, you're
Um,
so right.
if a few people are responsible for making sure that others can be rehydrated, those people are inherently going to have more power than the people who are not making sure that others are getting rehydrated. So, if you, like, theoretically, if you wanted to write a cool fan fiction of the three body problem, you could have the ones in charge decide we're not going to rehydrate everyone, or we're going to rehydrate them under very. I'm thinking of a word that starts with C.
I was going to suggest totalitarian.
Totalitarian works too. Yeah. So there's a lot of like stuff that could happen there. There's a few permanent structures on the planet, mostly palaces and monuments. The first computers are biological rather than electric and are made up of large crowds of people acting as bits in logic circuits, which is super cool. Like,
Yeah, if you're looking, another good one for biological computers is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is one of my
you have recommended
favorite
this to me before. I think you've talked about
favorite
it on the
ever.
podcast before.
Yeah, I love Children of Time. There's a
Excellent.
At a certain point, the super intelligent spiders develop the ability to use ants to make chemical computers. Super cool. Super cool.
That is so fun. Chemical computers are also good. Which I guess this is like maybe taking us to a different era of time and technology. What exactly defines a computer?
Yeah, it's a really great discussion because oftentimes the way that we think about computers actually boils down to a lot of theory work that was done by Alan Turing, um,
Mm,
famous computer scientist who helped crack the Nazi Enigma code.
yeah.
And a, a lot of the ways that we think about computers are just machines that can execute instructions is really what computers come down to. So you can have really simple
Okay.
computers, you can have really complex computers, but that's a lot of what it boils down to is that it can execute commands.
Okay, that makes sense.
Anyway, back to the three body problem. Um, Liu tells us inside the book that the chaos of the stars inspired the Trisolarans to advance their understanding of physics far beyond what humanity has achieved, to the point where they can, you know, leverage the fundamental forces of nature in order to create super materials, as well as achieve faster than light communication. All of these things that we just talked about are ways that Liu works through the cultural implications of the stellar environment he has chosen to put his aliens in.
Let's recap all those ways real quick and just like bullet points.
Yeah.
Um, so there's the biological implications with the dehydration, the cultural details about stars in the sky being three stars being a bad omen, the stable and unstable areas, which are also cultural, and it's highly hierarchical, and the permanent structures on the planet, such as palaces and monuments, biological computers, and their understanding of physics. So that covers like a lot of ground, right? It's like cultural, biological, knowledge base, like in the last bit. So Leo did like a phenomenal job world building this because a lot of people they don't dig this deep into the world building.
Yes, I think that clear thought in thinking things through about how the environment impacts the Trisolarans and how that manifests inside of their society and culture is one of the strengths of this book. I also think that that's part of the reason why the book won a Hugo Award.
Yeah.
I think my biggest critique with the approach that the three-body problem takes to world building is that it kind of falls prey to environmental determinism, which is this idea that the way that societies work is basically a function of their environment. There are lots of examples of cases where environments influence cultures on Earth. For example, when you have really scarce farming territory, it tends to create societies where you have polyandry, which is a really interesting thing to look into. But there are lots of examples where things run contrary to that, where there are aspects of the culture that are not the result of the environment, or the result of something like history or a collective decision to do things a certain way.
So we've been using a science fiction title here, but we'll argue that the same is true for terrestrial environments when we talk about what makes a generic fantasy setting. Like, you can have, we're not saying, so essentially what we're saying is environmental determinism is not only in science fiction, it's also in fantasy.
Yeah, and there's also, I think there's a trade-off in between the, like, how well environmental determinism works and the degree of novelty inside of your setting. Because, I mean, Trisolaris is a very novel concept. It's not something that we often think about. It's not a setup that we often see in fiction. And so for that reason, I think readers are more willing to go along with the environmental determinism that Liu uses inside of the book. Whereas if you're doing something kind of generic, like a forest or, plains.
Open plain, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Environmental determinism is not going to get you super far because the readers are going to get bored.
So, this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode. We move through it kind of quickly. But we have some homework for you, as always, as we do in this new season of Quid Pros Quo. So, your homework this time is to tell us about another case study you found that has to do with playing with astronomy to create novel environments. So, we realize this is a little bit of a niche homework assignment, but if you would like to explore more science fiction stuff, there's a post on C.K. Jensen Authors Threads where a bunch of people pitch their sci-fi novels to potentially be the case study on the show. So, if you are interested, you can go check all those out, and that would be a great resource for you. We haven't read all those books, obviously, because there's 30 books suggested there, and we posted it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we'll link to the Threads discussion inside of the show notes so that you can find them.
Yeah, that would be smart, because the longest episodes are the hardest going to get to find it.
Yep.
Awesome. This has been Quid Pros Quo. Next week, we will be talking about an indie book as a case study. We have not selected it yet, but it will be selected soon. Yes. But we have almost a month before it comes out. We have 3 weeks before this comes out, so we've got time to read it.
Yep.
We're doing great. And then after that, we'll be diving into the fairy tale course, which I'm super excited about because this is my area of expertise. You can probably tell that these episodes were Zach's brainchild. And I was just along for the ride, and it was a great ride, I will admit. But I'm really excited to talk about something that I have some expertise in, so I'm not just reading the notes. As fun as it is, it'll be great. Okay, this has been Quid Pros Quo. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Quid Pros Quo is hosted by DC Winters and CK Jensen. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today.